Feel free to have your camera off for now if you want, but while they're doing the intro.
Uh, no, it's fine.
Up to
I'll
you,
turn
yeah.
off my.
But yeah, if we're ready, we can go live. Folks are ready. All right, we'll go live in five, four, three, two, one.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our next Lynch Syndrome Center town hall. I do see that a few folks are joining in. We will give a few seconds for folks to join in before we get started. All right. So I think we can get started. So I'm Dr. Singh. I am the director of UCSF Lynch Syndrome Center, and I'm so excited to welcome Neha Shah. She is our nutrition expert in my GI division, and I was very thrilled when she accepted my invitation to talk to us about nutritional strategies to lower your risk of colorectal cancer. When I see patients in clinic, I am always time pressed to see how much I want to tell them about nutritional strategies that they can adopt to lower the risk of colorectal cancer, along with the colonoscopies that I can offer. So I thought having a space here, we can talk about these strategies in a dedicated manner would be of very high value to me and to all the patients that we serve. So Neha is a highly accomplished. She's a registered dietitian, and she's certified both as a nutrition support clinician as a health education specialist. She has a long-standing career. Since 2004, she has cared for patients with disorders of GI tract, including those diagnosed with GI cancers, and she has lots of expertise in IBD as well. Neha earned a bachelor's degree in nutrition from California Polytechnic State, followed by a master's of public health with a focus on nutrition from Loma Linda University, and where she also completed a dietetic internship. She combines her expertise in patient care with academic work at UCSF, and she also offers her services to professional organizations and education of fellows and multiple other ways she serves our division. So with that introduction, Neha, the floor is all yours. And for the attendees, we would love you to ask any questions. So please put those questions in the chat box. After this talk for about 30-35 minutes, we will be happy to ask your questions. So please let them come. All right, Neha, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. It's truly an honor to be here today to talk about my favorite topic today, really related to how we can colorectal cancer risk. So with that said, hold on real quick. Here are my disclosures. Okay, so let's just set our agenda for today. Our focus for today is how can we enhance our gut health to reduce the risk of colorectal cancer. So first off, we're going to go over some terminology. We're going to learn definitions of what is the gut microbiome, the gut microbiota. What does it mean to have optimal gut health? And as a dietitian over the years, what I've seen to be most successful in my visits with my patients is that how do we learn a little bit more about the different nutrients in the diet and how they interact with our gut, and then what is that relationship there and how is that related to lowering colorectal cancer risk, and then finally practical applications. At the end of the day, what do we eat more of to help us bring in the nutrients as individual add-ons to meals to help us lower the risk of colorectal cancer. Okay, so let's start off with what is the role of diet with colorectal cancer risk? Okay, this has been studied extensively throughout the years of nutrient risk factors that can increase the risk as well as nutrient risk factors that can lower the risk. So with looking at the various foods in the diet, a diet high in meat, high in total fat, lower in dietary fiber, and high in alcohol are all risk factors towards cancer. Um, Now, not all foods are created equal to one another, so we will highlight specifics within each category for the most part to help us highlight again what is actually constitutes a risk factor. And then certainly what can lower the risk is certainly a diet high in fiber again versus a low fiber diet, resistant starch, a hot topic nowadays, and certainly fermented foods, which again, I will go over all the various terms and the foods within. Let's start with our gut microbiota and our gut microbiome. A lot of attention has been really brought in over the years through a lot of research studies and just how do we optimize the gut microbiome? I call it our ecosystem that lives in our gut to take care of us. So the gut microbiota and the gut microbiome overall is really a collection of bacteria, fungi, and viruses, which is the microbiota, and then its genetic content, which is the microbiome, all live in our gut. And when we look at our digestive tract, this is the stomach, the small intestine, and the colon. And the gut microbiome all live in various areas, different species, and when we look at different influences on the gut microbiota and gut microbiome, diet plays a huge role in enhancing the diversity and composition of our gut microbiome to help us reduce the risk of chronic diseases. Now, there are various influences on our gut microbiome. Diet is just one. When we look at medications, how well we sleep, our stress levels, the mode of feeding at birth. As we get older, our microbiome can change over time throughout the lifespan. So all of these areas are looked at in terms of how we can enhance the gut microbiome. When the gut microbiome, when it's at its optimal diversity and composition, it's really we're looking at gut health. And there are several definitions out there for gut health. Overall, gut health really means the bowel, the colon, the intestines, really the digestive tract, its absence from disease, as well as there's no major symptoms of, say, loose stools, constipation, gas, bloating, just overall gastrointestinal discomfort. That it all constitutes gut health. Now, going back to our focus, how can diet change our gut microbiome? Okay, so kind of going back to our initial discussion on what are the risk factors. So a diet high in added sugars, refined sugars means certainly added sugars, processed sugars, refined starches, meaning that it's not a whole grain. It's more that whole grain has been broken down and some aspects of that fiber has been removed, such as brown rice is more of a whole grain versus white rice is going to be more of a starch. A diet total and higher in fat, especially animal fat. Again, we already talked about diet low in fiber, and then a diet higher in ultra processed foods. So when we have all of these elements in the diet coming in often during the day, often during the week, it can lead to changes in our gut microbiota and microbiome over time. Dysbiosis is the term that we use to describe negative changes in the gut microbiota and microbiome. Now, how does dysbiosis contribute to increasing the risk of colorectal cancer? So one aspect is, again, we're looking at a diet that's high in animal fat, low in dietary fiber, as we already outlined. And we eat these foods, and over time, certain foods in the diet promote the growth of certain species in our gut to enhance their diversity and composition. But when the diet does not have those foods, and the nourishment is removed to those certain species, and their growth goes down. And in turn, growth of certain other species of of the microbiome can increase, leading to further injury and inflammation over time because the byproducts made from the foods that these gut microbiome will act upon can also lead to further inflammation over time, further damage to the cell. And overall, if there's damage to the cell, then mutations is at a higher risk. So let's start with our first nutrient, or maybe compounds or substance is a better word that I'll use here. So what are heterocyclic amines? So HCAs, that's how I'm going to abbreviate it. So these are mutagenic, carcinogenic substances made from the reactions between amino acids, which is the protein, and creatine when meat, poultry, fish are cooked, whether it's grilling or barbecuing or pan frying at high temperatures over a longer period of time. The term mutagenic, meaning it has an ability to increase the risk of mutations within the cell. And then certainly when there is an increased level of mutations within the cell, there is also an increased risk of cancer. The levels of HCAs are influenced by cooking methods and duration. Even if the meat, poultry, and fish is cooked at a lower temperature, but if that same meat, poultry, and fish is cooked at a longer amount of time at a lower temperature, that's still a risk factor for formation of HCAs. And certainly, if the meat, poultry, fish is cooked on its own, or maybe there's other flavors added, like fruit marinades or spices and herbs, adding fruit, spices, or herbs has been shown to reduce the formation of HCAs, likely because there's antioxidants found in the fruit, spices, and herbs, which can neutralize free radicals that can cause damage to the cell. Another area, what are nitrates and nitrates? So overall, it's really a huge difference in their biochemical composition. They're actually found naturally in foods, fruits, vegetables, fish, meat, poultry, but it's also added as a synthetic preservative to reduce the risk of bacterial growth or to really add that pink color that we may see to cured meats and as well as to enhance flavor. So this is the concern here when a large amounts are eaten as a preservative versus as a natural source. Nitrates gets converted to nitrates, and then certainly from there, nitrosamines are also formed from this a reaction. So that is the concern when large amounts are eaten, and then in turn can also cause damage to the cell. And then with highlighting a study here, how meat can increase the risk of colorectal cancer is that this is a cohort study from the NIH AARP Diet and Health Study. And what this study has accomplished is that they have distributed a pretty comprehensive food frequency questionnaire to a large number of participants, men and women, adults, and this study has evaluated the intake of red and white meat type. Red meat meaning beef, pork, lamb, or as well as white meat coming from chicken. And then processed meats, ham, sausage, bacon, made from those two types of meats. Cooking methods including grilling, barbecuing, pan frying, and the level of doneness, whether it's well done or very well done or medium and rare. And what they've collected over the years, 7 years that they followed these men and women. And I like to also highlight that none of these men and women had cancer at baseline when they started to collect the data. 2,790 colorectal cancer cases were identified throughout the 7 years. So what they learned from this study is that an increased intake of red meat, but not white meat, and processed meat intake was highly correlated with the increased risk of colorectal cancer. Processed meat also very similar, an increased intake in processed meat was also associated with higher nitrate intake, and then certainly high red meat intake was associated with high HCA formation in intake. So overall, the conclusion from this study summarized that a high intake of red meat, not necessarily white meat, can increase the risk of cancer, colorectal cancer. Now, how does one reduce the HCA formation? To give up meat, poultry, fish altogether, that is not the ask here. But when we're in the process of prepping these foods in the kitchen, and then certainly, grilling or pan frying these foods, for one aspect is if you're going to a barbecue and they're having all these different items on the barbecue, is it on with an open flame? That is a huge risk factor for HCA formation. So if you have, and that's certainly not within our control when we attend barbecues, but if you have a barbecue at home, how can we reduce that interaction from that open flame to that meat, poultry, and fish? Not to prolong cooking time. Certainly, we want the foods to be cooked well enough to reduce any risk of food poisoning, but not to let it get to a point where it's blackened or charred. There's some studies to show that pre-treating the items in a microwave can reduce heat exposure and cooking time, and that could be a thought. Routinely turning the meat, poultry, and fish can also reduce HCA formation. A research study has highlighted that, say, a ground beef patty has less HCA compared to the other products that are not as turned frequently, because we tend to turn the patty over and up and down. And then certainly, again, flavor your meats, poultry, and fish. Add that tomato sauce, that garlic, that onion, that rosemary, the oregano. All of that can be a big part of reducing the HCA formation as well. Okay, so moving into processed foods. So this is also another area of hot topic. Not all processed foods are created equal. So when we hear the word processed foods, it's really important to know, where does that food fit into a category to help us understand, is this a healthful food to eat or not? So group one, this is the minimally processed foods. This could be the fruits, the vegetables. A lot of these foods exist in its whole form. This is dry beans, dry lentils, dry chickpeas, just plain fish that is bought. These are all examples of minimally processed foods. Now, with that said, a group two is processed culinary ingredients, and this also plays a role in how we can make meal prepping foods in the kitchen a little bit more convenient for us. Is that culinary ingredients may include plant oils and animal fats, just plain sugar, plain honey to help flavor foods, but other foods can also fit there. Now, some aspects of processing can occur with group three. So for example, dry beans is minimally processed, but canned beans is a little bit more processed. But again, if that's the only ingredient in that canned beans, and there's no other additives or preservatives or flavor enhancers, that is actually could be quite helpful to eat. Even frozen berries is considered to be a processed food, because they had to take those berries and format it in a way to be to be sold in the stores as a frozen item. Plain cheeses, milk, breads, pastas are all part of the processed foods to help convert from the minimally processed to an item that we can eat. And then the ultra processed foods, this is where there's added oils, added fats, added sugars to flavor the foods. A lot of the ready to go meals are considered to be ultra processed foods. I would have to say, as a dietitian, or just with so many years of experience, that just because a food is ready to go, it may not necessarily be an ultra processed food. It is so important to read the food labels of what is the makeup of that food. There's a lot of ready to go meals out there that are made from minimally processed foods, culinary ingredients, using just whole foods that are in a can, and that could be very well okay, versus a food that has an increased amount of additives and preservatives to prolong the shelf life of these foods. And that's where high intake of that may not be as helpful. So to highlight another study, ultra processed foods has been associated with an increased risk for colorectal cancer. So another cohort study, again, all the participants in these studies were given a food frequency questionnaire to evaluate dietary intake from all the different food groups in the diet, the different levels of processing within those food groups. And a large number of men and women participated in this study. Again, none of these participants had a diagnosis of cancer. So the results have shown that 3,216 cases of colorectal cancer were identified over a longer period of time, over 24 to 28 years. So it may not seem like a large number, but what they have found is that what is associated with an increased risk of colorectal cancer, again, an increased intake of ready to go, ready to heat up meat, poultry, seafood, and sugary beverages like sodas in men. And then certainly ready to go again, mixed dishes in women that were, again, all eating more of any of these foods was associated with an increased risk of colorectal cancer. So the conclusion was that how do we eat less of the ultra-processed foods and move towards using whole foods to make the foods that we want in our lives, in our kitchen. So how can we eat less ultra-processed foods? So we're in a day and age where convenience is an important factor. I am certainly not here to ask one to make their own pasta or their own bread or make their own yogurt at home, but it's really bringing in the skills to read the ingredients on every food label to really identify whole foods. Fruits, can you identify the fruits, the vegetables, the legumes off the list versus is there a longer list of additives and preservatives as a start? What can be helpful is that, say, again, ready-to-go foods are highly convenient, but can we buy ready-to-go ingredients that are not as processed to make the same foods that you want at home? So the use of ingredients and canned beans and frozen fruits and pre-cut veggies are all examples of ready-to-go ingredients that are minimally processed to ease a meal preparation at home. So some examples I can give here is like instead of, a flavored yogurt, choose a plain yogurt and you can add your own fruit, a frozen fruit to make it easier versus cutting it up, or cinnamon or a bag of almonds to add that flavor. Or instead of buying ready-to-go baked beans that can be enhanced with a lot of different flavor enhancers or additives and preservatives depending on the product, can we buy unflavored canned beans and add garlic, onion, and salsa, your own version of the ingredients to make baked beans? Or pizza, instead of ready to go frozen pizza that can be heat up in the oven, ready to go dough that can be rolled out and add toppings of your own on for that pizza. So eating less ultra processed foods will still involve some ingredients that are processed, but we can bring it down a notch or two, and that can also help reduce the risk of cancer. Okay, one of my favorite topics. So what is dietary fiber? So fiber is only found in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. It is not found in meat, poultry, fish, eggs, or dairy. Okay. As humans, we do not digest fiber. We lack the digestive enzymes to break down fiber. However, our microbiota can digest fiber. Their process of digestion of fiber is what we call fermentation. Not all fibers are equal in type, and different fibers have different roles in the gut. So with that said, the role of fiber that plays in gut health, and I will tie it back to how it can help one reduce the risk of cancer, is that fiber is a significant source of nourishment to our gut microbiota and our gut microbiome. The microbiota will ferment upon the fiber as it enters the colon, and then produces various amounts of different byproducts. Short chain fatty acids is something I will highlight. And short chain fatty acids is fuel to our colonic cells, our gut cells. It can help keep the pH of our gut at a certain level, and it has been shown to what we call downregulate inflammatory substances that can lead to injury and inflammation to the gut. So overall, fibers at each meal is what is needed to really enhance the diversity and composition of our gut microbiota to bring in the species to help us reduce inflammation. Okay, so another highlight here with a research study, how fiber can help reduce the risk of colorectal cancer. The European Prospective Investigation into Cancer and Nutrition Study, the EPIC study, this is a cohort study that really evaluates the associations between diet and lifestyle and environment with new cases of cancer across Europe. And pulling the data from this study, uh, again, all the participants as part of the study had no cancer at baseline. And then all this data was collected over 11 years. And 4,517 cases of colon and rectal cancer were diagnosed in these individuals. And the fiber intake, again, was obtained from a food frequency questionnaire, from total amount of fiber, cereal fibers, and fruit and vegetable fibers from the studies. And what the results have shown as a highlight that the total amount of fiber has been shown to reduce the risk of colon and rectal cancer with every 10-gram increase in fiber in the diet. And I will discuss that a little bit more in the next few slides. Cereals and fruit vegetable fiber intake has been shown to reduce the risk of colon cancer specifically, and fiber intake from cereals only has been shown to reduce the risk of rectal cancer. So because fiber is found in so many various foods, again, your fruits, your vegetables, your grains, your legumes, it's really looking at a wide variety of fibers in the diet to really bring down the risk from that perspective. Okay, so as a dietitian specializing in gastrointestinal health, nutrition for gastrointestinal health, me simply saying just add more fiber in the diet may not go as far. So there are various fiber types that exist in the diet, and various fibers, again, have a different role in the gut. The purpose of highlighting the different types of fiber is not meant to say you have to only eat this type of fiber, but is really to highlight how it's used for health. So solubility of fiber, that's one type of fiber. This is how the fiber is dissolves and holds in water like a sponge. So soluble fibers for your fruits, your oatmeal, your potato, your sweet potato, your avocado, these soluble fibers can help soften stools if one's dealing with gut issues, with more frequent trips to the bathroom, or perhaps are dealing with constipation. Insoluble fibers stimulate stool. They move things along. They do not dissolve and hold in water. These are the skins of fruits and vegetables, like a skin of an apple or like a spinach salad or nuts. And fermentability of fiber, this is the fiber that undergoes fermentation by intestinal bacteria. The more fermentable the fiber is, the chances that it could be more gas producing. So gas producing fibers could be like the beans, the lentils, the chickpeas, the stone fruits, wheats. And viscosity of fiber, this is the fiber when it forms a gel when mixed with fluids. So it just really thickens fluids. So if those who are having ongoing loose stools, it could be helpful there. If one is having, again, more frequent trips to the restroom, the soluble fibers can be in handy to slow that down. Fiber types overlap in the same food, and if one's not dealing with any major gut issues, wide variety of fibers is the goal in the diet. If one is dealing with gut issues, then it brings in a further focus on bringing in more of a fiber type to help one feel better, but still eat fiber. From my years of experience, so many have reduced their fiber intake because they don't feel well with fiber. But as a dietitian, it is so important to focus on the fiber types to help one feel better. Prebiotic fibers. So not all fibers in the diet are considered to be prebiotic. So prebiotic fibers, particularly the fructans and galactans, that's the terms that we use. It really targets the growth of certain types of microbiota that are beneficial to our health. Sources of prebiotic fibers, that oatmeal in the morning, or savory oats, as some cultures may consume, that avocado on sourdough toast, or perhaps, those jicama sticks with some hummus, which is also another legume. There are specific prebiotic fibers that we can identify, and it is beneficial to bring them into the diet every single day to promote the growth of certain species of the gut microbiota. Now, what are the daily requirements for fiber? there is set perimeters. I will also have to highlight that the set perimeters for fiber intake, it's been studied in individuals without any major health issues. We don't have daily requirements for fiber for those dealing with different diagnoses. We don't have that. So a lot of it's based on tolerance of fiber and the type of fibers to help one feel better. So for males, to highlight ages 19 through 50, 38 grams of fiber a day. Those who are greater than 50 years of age, 30 grams fiber a day. Females, a lot less. Certainly ages 19 through 50, 25 grams of fiber a day. And then those who are over 50, 21 grams of fiber a day. One thing I can also highlight is that, again, these are set perimeters and one can aim to meet that, which is also very important. But tolerance to fiber can vary from one person to another. So it's really important that we focus on what makes one feel good too. And to put this in practical application, kind of outlined a day of fiber. If you look towards the right at that table, so say if one had oatmeal in the morning, perhaps some black bean and sweet potato hash for lunch, maybe with some avocado, maybe those raspberries are thrown onto that oatmeal, a banana as a snack, maybe with those almonds, all that will add up to 30 grams of fiber. And this is between all the meals in the day and all the snacks in the day. I made sure I include a wide variety of prebiotic fibers, insoluble, soluble, so we get a wide variety in there. But it doesn't take a whole lot of fiber to be added into the diet. A size of a tennis ball is a half a cup, just to kind of give you a perimeter that we're working with. So this is what I do as a dietitian. I help my patients work out little fiber plans so we can bring in the fiber as well as the fiber type. Now, what is resistant starches? So this is part of the food that also has fiber. Okay, so they're all found in fiber-containing foods. This is the portion of starch that cannot be digested at all by amylase, which are digestive enzymes targeted towards breaking down carbohydrates in the small intestine. And then as fiber, it passes into the colon to undergo fermentation by our microbiota. There are 4 types of resistant starch. So RS1, naturally occurring cell walls of plants, plain grains, seeds, beans, lentils, chickpeas. RS2, again, naturally occurring foods that have starch, not necessarily the cell walls, like a green banana or even an apple is an example of an RS2. I think that saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, I think there's some truth to that when we're looking at resistant starches. And then RS3 is formed from the cooling process of foods with starch. So this is something we can make in our kitchen, where we say we boil and cool down an oat or a potato, and that cooling process forms the resistant starch, and it can be reheated as leftovers for the next day. It can be added to soups and whatnot, or salads. And then RS4 are really related to resistant starch supplements. And then to highlight another study with resistant starch and how it can play a role in reducing the risk of colorectal cancer, the CAP2 trial. It's been a trial that's been around for years, for at least the last 10 years or even longer, with that said. So the prior CAP2 trial from 2012 had patients diagnosed with Lynch syndrome randomized to take 30 grams of a resistant starch. Now I want to highlight this is through a supplement, okay, or a placebo for up to 4 years. So that is a large number of patients, 455 to be exact. What they found from the earlier studies that the rates for the new cases for colorectal cancer were very similar from those who took the resistant starch and those who took the placebo. And then later on, the patients were followed up in 10 years. So 2 years ago, that follow-up study was published. And what they found, there was no actually new diagnosis of colorectal cancer between those that have taken resistant starch and the placebo supplements. However, what they have shown is that the non-colorectal cancers, especially with more upper GI cancers like gastric cancer, has been shown that the resistant starch has reduced the risk of that. Those on resistant starch had a lower diagnosis of the non-colorectal cancers versus those who took the placebo. We need further studies. This study used a supplement, but we do need further studies on the use of whole foods and its role in reducing the risk of colorectal cancer, like how many servings of potato or beans or oatmeal are needed in the day to help achieve the 30 grams that were used in this study. Now, practical application, what are some ways that we can add resistant starch to meals? So as an example, an apple or a banana with peanut butter, or when the next time you eat oatmeal in the morning, we can boil and cool down that oatmeal, make a big batch on a Sunday morning for the rest of the week and reheat that throughout the week. Certainly, same thing with potatoes in a soup of choice or plantains, grilled, cooled, reheated. If you want to boil and cool down pasta for salads or a rice, that's another way to add resistant starch to meals. So what are fermented foods? So with fermented foods, these are foods made through desired microbial growth. So an active live culture is added to a food to bring in a desired taste. And then that active culture, which is usually a lactic acid bacteria, it acts upon the sugars, the carbohydrates in that food and converts it to a new product. So the role of fermented foods in gut health is that, again, live cultures are used to make the fermented foods. And these live cultures is what, we're aiming to inhabit the gut. When fermented foods are eaten, increase the diversity of the gut microbiota and to really enhance the intestinal barriers and to reduce inflammation. Studies have shown that fermented foods have been associated with a reduced inflammation, and that is something that's also encouraged to be brought often into the diet. Now, to highlight another study, and I believe this is the last study, is that yogurt has been the most commonly studied fermented food, and not just with the reduction in cancer risk, but overall with other gastrointestinal diagnoses such as inflammatory bowel disease. But from the cohort from the Nurses Health Study and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study found that, they evaluated the yogurt intake, and again, it's through another food frequency questionnaire. None of these participants had a diagnosis at baseline, and they were routinely followed up for a while, like over 3 decades or close to 3 decades, both in the women and men. And what they found is that 2,666 newly diagnosed cases of colorectal cancer were discovered throughout the follow-ups. And they found that the yogurt intake, at least one serving once a week, was associated with a reduction in risk of proximal colon cancer risk. And sources of fermented foods, again, most of the studies have been done in yogurt, but fermented dairy, like your buttermilk, kefir, yogurt, even sour cream, kimchi, kombucha, miso, sauerkraut, tempeh are all examples of fermented food that actually have live cultures. Now, there are a lot of fermented foods out there that a live culture was used to make that food. However, the end product does not have the live cultures anymore. Like, for example, sourdough bread is a fermented bread, but the end product, there's not much live cultures in there. So the focus is to bring in fermented foods that are have live cultures. So different ways to have fermented bites is definitely, say, the yogurt in the morning with the banana, or buttermilk and mango lassi. I'm trying to be culturally inclusive as much as I can here. Kimchi with those scrambled eggs, or maybe next time you're at a Japanese restaurant, order that miso soup. Sauerkraut and avocado with crackers, or tempeh as an add-on into salads. Like, if you haven't tried fermented bites yet, then this is something I will encourage you to try once a day to see where this will go. Okay, so to wrap this up, short-term goals and long-term goals. So what are the quick wins that we can strive for? So in the next 4 weeks, what can we do to start this off? For fiber resistant starches in fermented foods. So fiber is really adding a fruit or a vegetable of choice in a half a cup, size of a tennis ball, to each meal. I want to promote flexibility and autonomy as much as I can. So what do you like out of those categories? that we can add to meals. Resistant starch. Next time you have oatmeal, can we boil it, cool it down, and reheat it for the next day? Next time you want to include sweet potatoes at a meal, can we boil and cool that down? And again, reheat it as a side of your meal. Fermented food, let's add that yogurt, put that in a smoothie, make a salad dressing out of yogurt, or make a salad dressing out of miso. Like, how can we bring that in daily, at least once a day, or each meal to the best of your ability to help start this off? And the long-term goals is that, again, I want to promote flexibility and autonomy as much as I can. So if I say add a fruit or a vegetable to each meal, like I said before, what do you enjoy out of those categories that you can include? If I say include a protein at each meal, how would you bring that protein in? Is it and reduce the HCA formation as an example, or even plant protein, a side of beans instead of beef as part of your taco. So we treat the diet like a worksheet, and you fill in the areas with the foods that you enjoy for optimal flexibility and autonomy. And then I want to lastly provide resources. To our food choices are connected to what we have access to, our culture, how much time we want to spend in the kitchen, what we are able to do in the kitchen. So it's not just we want to encourage cooking more often in the home, but there are resources out there like cooking kits where they will mail one, a bag of ingredients and a recipe card that you can put together if it's too much trouble to go to the grocery store and get all those ingredients. Recipe platforms, all of these you can create an account and create folders and deposit recipes as you choose. And then meal planning platforms is that some of these websites with a subscription service, they'll send you weekly meal plans, matching recipes, and matching grocery lists, and that's something you can also do. So what can we do to create an easy system in the kitchen as a start? And then finally, thank you for this invitation to speak. It's truly an honor to be here and collaborating with all of you with the UCSF Lynch Syndrome Center, and I welcome questions now.
Thank you so much, Neha. This was extremely informative, and honestly, I learned a lot. Nutrition is a topic that we often do not have time to talk about during our clinic visits.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to see the helpful tips you provided, along with the science that how we can make proactive changes in our diet. And some questions have come up that we try to answer some live, but I will start answering a few here. So one question was for resistant starch. So I'm going to send a few links here in the chat box, and there are a bunch of handouts that you can see that have recipes for how to include resistant starch in your diet. So hopefully this will be of help to you. I hope this goes here. I'll get this to you in the chat box. But the first question, let's see, answer is, someone asked, what happens to your microbiome if you do colonoscopy prep? And that's a great question. Many of the Lynch individuals, they have to have colonoscopy every 1 to 2 years.
Right.
And how does that impact? So this has been looked at. Your microbiome does change with bowel prep. But what research has found is after a few weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks, it does go back to your baseline. So as of now, we don't have concrete data that doing multiple colonoscopy preps changes your microbiome, that increases your risk for any cancers or in any significant way. So fortunately, it goes back to where you were.
Right.
Yeah, and so the next question I ask Neha is, what are your thoughts about probiotic supplements for cancer risk reduction?
Okay. So with cancer risk reduction and probiotics, let's first talk about what is a probiotic. Okay. It is not a whole food. It is really a supplement that consists of live cultures. It has to meet a certain dosing requirement, what we call colony forming units of a certain amount for it to be qualified as a probiotic. So probiotic supplements, so a couple of things there is that fermentation is not there. Okay, it's the fermentation of whole foods what produces the compounds that are been shown to be anti-inflammatory to our gut and be protective of our body cells. With the data on probiotics and cancer risk, there is some mixed data showing there could be some benefit. However, the benefit has been seen greater with using whole foods to reduce that risk. One thing I also have to add is that there are so many probiotics out there in the shelf, and the probiotic has to have the strain, the type of species, how often to really what is appropriate for reducing cancer risk. So grabbing any probiotic off the shelf is not what's recommended. It's really looking at what strains will be helpful. That has been studied the most in reducing the cancer risk. So my recommendation here is that if one were to use a probiotic, what are the reasons why you're taking that probiotic? Where is the data involved for that particular probiotic and what you're trying to address? And the whole foods is still a big part, even if you're taking a probiotic every day. If one develops a lot of gas and bloating with taking a probiotic, it might be too much and we need to cut back or stop from that perspective as well.
Perfect. Thanks for explaining that a little bit more. And Dr. Singh dropped off, but I'll continue asking questions in her absence. So one question we got a lot of are kind of if, how you process foods, if that makes a difference. So if you blend up a banana, does that change the resistant starch? Or if you freeze yogurt, is that going to be a problem?
No, not at all. Go for it. um, so, and that kind of comes back to developing systems, right? One can buy frozen fruit, and that eases time to cut up that fruit. And maybe it will help that individual eat more fruit in the day if it's easier to eat, if it's ever pre-cut or frozen. So it does not necessarily impact the composition from that perspective. Frozen yogurt, I probably have to look into that in a little bit of a deeper look into that. However, then the cultures are frozen. They're live cultures. So same with if we overly heat a fermented food, then it does bring down the live culture. So I would imagine frozen cultures would have a similar impact on some level. So we really aim for just foods as is and to be consumed to get that fermented food in.
Got it. And then I'm seeing some other questions asking,
Okay.
should I be kind of scared to eat chicken, or how should I find a balance of being
So
an
let's talk
informed
about
eater?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely the recommendation is not to give up meat, poultry, or fish, and not to give up, that barbecue that all your friends are going to. What it would involve is shifting the focus. So it's a focus on what to add more of. So how do we add more of plant-based foods to each meal to function as antioxidants, bring in the fiber, bring in the resistant starches? When it comes to meat, poultry, and fish, it can still be a part of your diet, but with the gray area, how do we cut back on the HCA formation? How do we sprinkle them in as a part of like a soup, a stew, a casserole versus an 8-ounce steak with minimal sides of veggies? So it's really looking at that focus of sprinkling them into your meals versus like it being a big main entree and there's very little fiber containing or resistant starch foods as a part of that meal.
Got it.
Great
And then,
questions.
yeah. So one that you've touched on a little bit, but I'm just going to ask again because I think it's kind of common on a lot of people's mind in the chat is, I
My
think, asking,
internet is fuzzy.
yep, you're still breaking up a little bit, unfortunately, Appy. So while we're kind of hoping that her connection gets a little bit clearer, I was just asking tips you might have or strategies you share with your patients about how to balance being, an informed eater versus having kind of an overly regimented routine where they're really kind of weighing and measuring everything out every meal.
So I think it's really defining that gray area. And I think one aspect is to work with a registered dietitian for guidance on how to find that gray area to really up the flexibility autonomy. When we become a well-informed eater, I think one way to look at the diet is what I said earlier. The foods that have been shown to increase the risk of cancer, um, and our focus today was more of the colorectal cancer, but I know Lynch syndrome can be increases risk of all other forms of cancers. What are the foods that increase the risk? How do we eat them in smaller amounts to meals? That's the gray area. What would that work for you? So an 8 ounce could be this much, a 3 ounce, a hamburger patty is this much. An ounce is my two fingers put together. So how do we keep the portions between 2 to 3 ounces as a thought? And again, is what is paired up with that to help break that regimen. Now, if it's overly regimented, then it's important for me to know as a dietitian, like it's not just the diet, but what is about this regimen? What are the fears if you get off the regimen? How do we reduce some of the concerns? And to really break that regimen, what I usually like to do is if there's too many changes occurring in one day, that could be tough. But how do we take one meal in the day and practice breaking that regimen at that one meal? Maybe it's at a different time. Maybe it's a different way of cooking a meal. Maybe instead of that one particular vegetable that you want to eat at a certain time of the day, it's a different vegetable. Like regimens have different definitions for people. So I think it really requires more of an individualized approach to do that. But what I look for is how do we add more of the foods that can reduce the risk at each meal, and how do we sprinkle in the foods in smaller amounts that can potentially may not be as beneficial towards cancer.
Got it. And then a little bit actually to your question and some of the other things that you've mentioned. What should someone do if they're interested in meeting with someone like you, someone who
Yeah.
can talk about food and nutrition?
That's another great question. Like, where are the resources there? So one aspect with the UCSF Lynch Syndrome Center that a referral is needed to see a dietitian. I definitely counsel every day on some aspects all related to all of this. And it would involve asking step one, a referral from your physician. Step two, getting that appointment scheduled. Step three, coming to that appointment, be prepared to talk about your diet, the different food groups in and out of your diet, your fears, your concerns, your different social environments that you eat foods in. And then the dietitian will go through the different areas of the health and pull out the information. Okay, there's always strengths in everyone's diet. It's always easy to take a look at and be like, okay, well, what am I doing wrong? What are you doing right? So let's keep that. That's the strengths. And then certainly the areas that can require further enhancements, let's make a list of those priorities and establish a goal and strategies to help meet that goal. That would be the gist of an initial session. And then follow-up appointments are used to track progress, troubleshoot, and build the diet along the way.
Perfect. I know sometimes that's the hardest thing is just figuring out where to go when you have those questions. So it sounds like a referral is a good place to start from your primary care provider.
Yes. I'm looking at all the list of questions. Okay. Let's see. I think there was a question. This is a focus on colorectal cancer, but can this be applied to all forms of cancer? Yes, definitely. Changes in gut health has been associated on some level to every cancer out there. So all these strategies would be very appropriate from that perspective. Let's see. Oh, you mentioned cooking meats at high temperatures, long duration can damage cells. Does this mean it damaged the cells in the meat, which could potentially damage our cell, or does it directly damage human cell? It directly damages human cells. I will answer that. Okay. Any other questions, Sarah, that have come your way?
You might not know this, I might circle back later, but for people who might have had a colectomy, so part or all of
Oh,
the
yeah,
colon removed, do these
that's
kind of recommendations and everything we've been talking about still apply?
100%. Our gut microbiome does not just live in our colon, it lives in many aspects in our small intestine. We're just talking about our gut microbiome, but there's also microbiome on our skin and other areas of the body. So all these concepts still very much apply to those without a colon. And not having a colon, I mean, at least just from my years of experience, can raise questions on how one can feel after they eat um, with ongoing any potential gut symptoms. So it would be really important to work with a registered dietitian that specializes in GI that can help you feel better as well, if that is an issue.
And then a common question that I've seen is whether or not we'll have access to this recording or slides later on. And we are planning to upload some of that. So I would check out the Lynch Syndrome Center website. We'll be working on putting that. Sometimes takes a little bit to process the recording. So I don't think it'll be there tomorrow, but look for it in the future.
Yes.
All right, and I'm sorry for my internet being fuzzy and I lost you guys for a few seconds. Um, so if this question hasn't been answered, I see one last question I hope I can address is, are there any tests for assessing what microbiome I have?
Yes.
Yeah, so I can, and that's an excellent question. And that's a hot research topic lately is we definitely know that uh, microbiome impacts your cancer risk and even beyond cancer risk, obesity risk, your autoimmune disorders risk. We are learning more and more about strong association with the kind of microbiome we have, but we are not there yet. There are multiple tests that exist. You can see multiple websites offering your microbiome analysis testing. But as of now, it is hard to find a concrete data that those results, those tests will tell you that you can use that information to make any meaningful change in your management. So I wouldn't do that for microbiome profiling outside research setting as of now, but I definitely feel that will be something in future. We will utilize that data to alter your microbiome and know your risk profile. Not there yet, but hopefully
Yeah.
soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Neha? What do you think?
I agree with you. We may have a different answer for you a year from now. The research is always evolving. I personally do not use results from a stool microbiome test just because it only captures a certain area of the gut. I don't know whether it's dead or live microbiome as well. And it's a snapshot in time. We're dealing with live species that have their own birth and death cycle. So just because a particular species is low, it could just very well go up, the next few days. And then now, so again, I hope to have a different answer for all of you a year from now or 2 years from now. I think there's potential, but right now I don't personally use it to guide diet.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'm looking at the clock. So I think we can wrap up at this moment. I want to thank Sarah for helping me organize this town hall, and a huge thanks to Neha for taking time to talk to us
Of
about this
course. Thank
very,
you.
very important topic. And I do appreciate all the attendees for joining us. I know it's end of the day, so it just tells us your commitment to learn about dietary changes, which we really, really appreciate you attending. And we do hope to continue these town halls. And so please send us your feedback. And we are trying to revamp UCSF Lynch Syndrome Center websites to add some more information. So stay connected there.
Yes.
With that, I would like to end this town hall and let you go back to your friends and family and perhaps make the right choices for your dinner tonight.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Okay, have a
Bye.
good night. Bye.